Ronnie Coleman has spoken at length over the years about what he believes defines a great bodybuilder, and his perspective is more layered than his own career might suggest. Size matters to him. Conditioning matters. Arriving on the most important night of the year with the most complete package possible matters enormously. But Coleman consistently returns to another element: work ethic. The willingness to outwork everyone around you, and the mental discipline to continue when every rational signal says to stop. He also holds a genuine appreciation for aesthetics that extends beyond sheer mass. He has spoken about proportion, symmetry, and the way a physique reads under stage lighting. He grew up admiring the bodybuilders of the golden era, and that regard for the visual craft of the sport stayed with him even as he helped push the sport into a new era of extreme size. He can hold both positions without contradiction, an appreciation for a perfectly proportioned 220-pound physique, alongside an understanding of what it means to bring 300 pounds of conditioned muscle to the Olympia stage. Beyond that, Coleman values influence, the capacity to shape the direction of the sport, to establish a standard that compels others to rise or fall behind. He regards this as something distinct from competitive results. It is about legacy. And for Ronnie Coleman, legacy is the ultimate measure of a bodybuilder's significance. With that framework in mind, here is the list. Arnold Schwarzenegger appearing at or near the top of Ronnie Coleman's list comes as no surprise. It was about as predictable as anything in bodybuilding. But the way Coleman speaks about Schwarzenegger goes beyond the standard reverence common in the sport. Coleman doesn't simply credit Arnold as the man who brought bodybuilding to a mainstream audience, though that much is accurate. He points specifically to Arnold's combination of size and aesthetics as something that has never been fully replicated, a remarkable position coming from a man who carried more muscle mass on stage than Schwarzenegger ever did. In saying this, Coleman is effectively acknowledging that bigger isn't always better, and that the version of physical perfection Arnold achieved in the 1970s occupies its own category, distinct from the mass-focused era that followed. At his peak, Schwarzenegger's physique, the wide shoulders, narrow waist, chest that flared under the lights, arms that became the most recognized in the world, had a visual impact rooted as much in artistry as in athletics. He understood how to present a physique and how to work a relationship with an audience. He was performing as much as he was competing, and the combination of physical development and personal charisma produced something the sport had not seen before, and arguably has not seen since. There's also a personal dimension to Coleman's ranking. Schwarzenegger's presence in Pumping Iron and in bodybuilding magazines was among the images that first drew Coleman toward the sport. Growing up in a small Louisiana town, with little connection to the bodybuilding world, Coleman encountered images of Schwarzenegger, physically developed, charismatic, and seemingly without limits, and something took hold. That early impression eventually led to 8 Olympia titles, but at the start, Schwarzenegger was the aspiration. Placing him on the list reflects both a recognition of his achievements and a degree of personal gratitude. Haney is the figure who transformed the Mr. Olympia title from an achievement into a standard. 8 consecutive victories between 1984 and 1991 established a record that defined the competition for over a decade, a number widely regarded as the ceiling of what was possible. That context matters when considering Ronnie Coleman's decision to include Haney on this list. Ronnie is the man who matched that record in 2005, and depending on how the comparison is framed, equaled it with 8 consecutive titles of his own. The fact that he speaks of Haney with genuine admiration rather than competitive distance says something about both men. Haney's physique was defined by proportion. He was not pursuing the extreme mass that would characterize the generation after him. His build had an X-frame quality, wide shoulders, a narrow waist, arms and legs balanced in a way that no single muscle group disrupted the overall line. His conditioning crucially held at that level for 8 straight years. That consistency is often underweighted in assessments of Haney's career. Reaching a competitive peak once is difficult. Sustaining it annually, while competitors prepare specifically to unseat you, while judging pressure compounds, while the physical and psychological demands accumulate, is a different kind of achievement altogether. Ronnie has direct knowledge of what that sustained excellence requires. He competed under the same conditions for the same duration. When he looks at Haney's 8-year run, he is not simply reading a record. He understands the discipline, the sacrifice, and the mental consistency that sit behind it. That recognition carries a weight that only shared experience can produce. The two men occupy the same narrow place in the history of the sport, the only competitors to win 8 Olympia titles. Ronnie's inclusion of Haney here, offered without qualification or rivalry, reflects the character of someone who understands precisely what that record cost. Dorian Yates is the bridge between the aesthetic era of the 1980s and the mass-oriented era that Ronnie Coleman would later define. He won 6 consecutive Olympia titles from 1992 to 1997, and his training philosophy, the high-intensity approach he documented and shared under the name Blood and Guts, shaped how a generation of bodybuilders approached their work in the gym. Ronnie has spoken about Dorian with genuine admiration, and the basis for that respect is straightforward. At a surface level, the two men share meaningful similarities. Both were defined by their commitment to training. Both treated sheer work as the foundation of their success. Both brought unprecedented size to the Olympia stage, pushing the sport beyond what had previously been considered possible, and both paid significant physical costs for those ambitions. Dorian through a series of muscle tears, including the tricep injury that ended his career at the 1997 Olympia, and Ronnie through the spinal damage that has shaped his life since competition. But Ronnie's appreciation for Dorian extends beyond those parallels. Dorian established the standard that Ronnie inherited. When Ronnie won his first Olympia in 1998, the year following Dorian's final title, he was stepping into a competitive landscape that Dorian had fundamentally altered. The expectations around conditioning, around size, around competitive intensity, Dorian had advanced all of them. Over the 8 years that followed, Ronnie exceeded that standard. But the path had been set before he arrived. There is also the matter of Dorian's back. In discussions about the greatest back ever brought to the Olympia stage, two names consistently appear at the top: Dorian Yates and Ronnie Coleman. The thickness, detail, and separation in Dorian's back, particularly at the 1993 and 1994 Olympia, had no real precedent in the sport. Ronnie would eventually present something that many considered superior, but Dorian reached that level first, and Ronnie has acknowledged it. His place on this list reflects both respect for the physique and recognition of the role Dorian played in defining what the Olympia came to represent. Flex Wheeler is the only man on this list who never won the Mr. Olympia. And yet Ronnie Coleman, a man who won 8 of them, places him among his top 6. That speaks to how Coleman measures greatness in the sport. Wheeler has been described by those with authority to judge as the most genetically gifted bodybuilder to ever compete at the professional level. Arnold Schwarzenegger has said that had he possessed Wheeler's genetics, the results would have been incalculable. Wheeler had a symmetry and a flow to his physique that was nearly without precedent. Every muscle group connecting to the next with a naturalness that most bodybuilders spend entire careers trying to approximate and rarely achieve. His arms were extraordinary. His waist was small to a degree that seemed inconsistent with his overall development. His shape operated outside the standard metrics of the sport, in a register closer to aesthetics than athletics. He won 4 Arnold Classic titles. The Arnold Classic is the second most prestigious contest in professional bodybuilding, and 4 victories there represent a sustained level of elite performance that few have matched. The Olympia title, however, remained out of reach, for reasons that continue to be debated. The competition during his peak years, spanning Dorian Yates' dominance through the early years of Coleman's era, was among the most competitive in the sport's history. Judging criteria at certain points favored mass over proportion in ways that disadvantaged Wheeler, and there were conditioning inconsistencies that appeared at critical moments. None of that changes what he was as a competitor. Coleman faced Wheeler multiple times and won, and yet he includes Wheeler on this list, acknowledging in effect that Wheeler brought something to those competitions that the results alone do not capture. That reflects both a generosity and an aesthetic sensitivity that Coleman is not always credited for. He understands what he accomplished, and he understands what Wheeler brought to the same stage, and he is willing to hold both assessments simultaneously. Ronnie Coleman's 5th pick introduces one of the more closely watched dynamics in professional bodybuilding. Coleman and Phil Heath have shared a long, publicly documented rivalry, trading pointed comments in interviews representing opposing sides of the GOAT debate. Coleman holds 8 Olympia titles to Heath's 7, and both men have made their positions on that comparison clear. The exchanges between them have at times carried an edge that went beyond ordinary competitive friction. That context makes Coleman's inclusion of Heath among his favorite bodybuilders a notable one. It reflects a willingness to set aside whatever tension exists between them and acknowledge something Coleman, more than almost anyone, has the standing to assess. Phil Heath, at his peak, was an extraordinary competitor. Heath won the Olympia 7 consecutive times, from 2011 through 2017. He brought a combination of mass and conditioning that stood without equal in the post-Coleman era. His arms in particular were widely regarded as among the finest ever displayed on the Olympia stage during those years. His overall package, the size, the detail, the proportions carried forward the mass standards that Coleman's era had established, while adding a level of conditioning and refinement that represented a genuine advancement rather than a continuation of what came before. Coleman's decision to include Heath also carries an implicit dimension relevant to the GOAT discussion. He is not conceding ground on his own standing. He holds 8 titles to Heath's 7 and has stated his view on what that difference means. But he is also not allowing competitive pride to override his judgment as an observer. He is able to separate the two, and in doing so place Heath among the best he has seen across more than 50 years of professional bodybuilding. That is not a minor assessment. Ronnie Coleman placed himself 6th on his own list of favorite bodybuilders. When the answer became public, reactions fell into roughly three camps. Some found it difficult to accept. The idea of including yourself on a list of personal favorites struck them as an unusual form of self-regard. Others were unsurprised, even entertained, given Coleman's long-established confidence. He is, after all, the man who would load a bar with weight few athletes could safely attempt, look into the camera and say, "Lightweight, baby." Self-doubt has never been a visible part of his approach. A third group, on reflection, concluded it was the most honest answer he could have given. If Coleman was genuinely being asked which bodybuilders he admires most, excluding himself would require a kind of false modesty that runs counter to his character. From Coleman's own vantage point, the choice is coherent. He has spent more than 60 years in this life, and his prime years were devoted to building one of the most documented physiques in the sport's history. He understands, in a way no outside observer fully can, what that process required. The training, the diet, the mental discipline, the physical cost, and the sustained daily commitment to exceed what others were willing to do. If he genuinely regards his own physique as among the greatest in the history of competitive bodybuilding, and his statements consistently indicate that he does, then omitting himself from the list would be dishonest, rather than humble. Coleman's confidence in his own achievements is specific and grounded. It is not a claim about status or potential, but a settled assessment of documented results. He points to concrete evidence, 8 Olympia titles, a physical cost that has followed him into his later years, and a competition record that remains a reference point in the sport. When he looks at his peak presentations, the 2003 Olympia, frequently cited as his most complete, or the 2004 showing that many consider the most extreme combination of mass and conditioning ever displayed at that level, he sees work he genuinely admires. He sees no reason to obscure that. In that sense, the choice may be the most revealing entry on the entire list. It reflects an assessment of bodybuilding that is not filtered through concern for how the answer will be received. Coleman was not managing perception, signaling humility, or deferring to convention. He answered the question as asked. These are the 6 bodybuilders I find most impressive and most worthy of admiration. One of them is himself. You can love it or hate it, but you cannot say it isn't on brand.